Hey everyone, today we're talking about something super important for all the selling books in the EU and Northern Ireland, the General Product Safety Regulation, or GPSR. It came into effect on December 13th, 2024, and it's all about making sure products, including books, are safe. But first, a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. This video, the description, and my blog on this are not to be taken as legal advice. This is my interpretation of the GPSR to help fellow authors. For specific advice, please consult a legal professional. Okay then, why should authors care? Well, if you're selling in or to the EU and Northern Ireland, you need to comply with the GPSR. This means understanding the rules and making sure you meet the requirements. Most authors are confused as to whether it applies to digital books. There is no clear answer. This regulation updates the old rules and can be interpreted as applying to digital books as well, given that it does mention intangible products. However, it does not explicitly mention digital books. The bottom line is that it's a matter of interpretation, and we will have to see how it pans out. Most people argue that the GPSR only becomes relevant if the ebooks are tied to a physical product that could pose safety concerns. The legislation does talk about digitally connected products if a product has a digital element. An example of this would be if you sold an electronic cat litter tray and supplied a video, digital, on how to set it up. In fact, ebooks and digital products have their own set of EU regulations dated prior to the GPSR. The EU Directive 2019/770 on digital content and digital services specifically covers digital products, including digital books. This directive came into effect on January 1st, 2022, and applies across the EU and Northern Ireland. These are the key provisions related to digital books. There are conformity obligations. Digital books must meet the expected quality, functionality, and compatibility standards as described at the time of purchase. There is a duration of liability. Sellers must ensure digital content is free from defects for at least 2 years, unless a longer period is specified in the contract. There is an updates requirement. Sellers must provide essential updates to ensure the product continues functioning properly during this time. The legislation mentions remedies for defects. If an ebook is faulty, such as inaccessible, corrupted, or missing promised features, consumers are entitled to a fix or replacement if possible, or a price reduction or full refund if the issue can't be resolved. And, as you would expect, there is a data protection requirement. If personal data is required for accessing the digital book, consumers can withdraw consent and sellers must delete the data if applicable. Now remember, this is earlier legislation. It is not the GPSR, but this legislation is still in force. Here's how the two are related. The GPSR focuses on the safety of physical products, ensuring they do not pose risks to consumers. The Directive 2019/770, on the other hand, governs the quality and functionality of digital content and services, such as ebooks, apps, or software, but not their physical safety. Let's talk about the batch number. Article 8, paragraph 5 of the GPSR states, manufacturers shall ensure that their products bear a type, batch or serial number or other element allowing their identification, or where the size or nature of the product does not allow it, that the required information is provided on the packaging or in a document accompanying the product. Okay, that's the end of the quote. With books, an ISBN would fulfill this requirement. The legislation also requires that the manufacturer shall indicate their name, their registered trademark if they have one, their postal address, their email address, and also the name of the EU representative. The email address and the postal address of the EU representative need to be on the product or the documentation that comes with the product. Your postal address and email address have to be on the product or with the product. The email and postal address of your EU representative have to be on the product. The copyright page would be a good place to do this. If the surveillance authorities happen to ask you for it, you need to provide them a copy of the mandate. This document outlines all the tasks that you have trusted your authorised representative to do. By the way, if you're selling merch and using Printify, Printify is supplying an EU responsible person. The EU responsible person could be quite an issue for people outside the EU. If you are inside the EU, you can designate yourself as the responsible person. But for those of us who are outside the EU, we have to appoint somebody who resides within the EU and has an EU address. Some companies are providing this responsible person. BookVault is providing one, and Lulu Direct will announce more soon. If not using a company that provides one, do you have a friend in the EU who is willing to take this on? If not, EAS Compliance is offering the service for €199 per product type per year. Yes, books are one product type. There is absolutely no way around this. For physical books, you absolutely must have an EU responsible person. For books, it's probably just red tape, but if somebody makes a safety complaint about your books, the authorities will ask the responsible person to provide documentation. Now let's talk about the 2-year warranty. Under the GPSR, products are generally covered by a 2-year legal warranty. Everything now has a 2-year warranty, and you'll have to offer refunds and returns even if it's against your store policy. This is a consumer right mandated by EU law, ensuring that goods sold must be free from defects and conform to the sales contract for 2 years after purchase. The 2-year legal warranty is mandated by EU Directive 1999/44/EC on consumer sales. Safety requirements. I'll break it all down now. First of all, you need to think about any potential risks your book might pose. You might think this is crazy. They're books after all. But this is especially important for children's books. First, consider the physical safety of construction. Bindings must be secure, no sharp edges from staples or other fasteners, and paper quality must meet standards to prevent cuts. Those paper cuts can hurt. Second, material safety. Inks, adhesives, and materials used must be non-toxic and meet EN 713 requirements for migration of certain elements, especially for books likely to be mouthed by children under 36 months. Third, small parts testing. For children's books with attachments or interactive elements, these must not present a choking hazard and should pass relevant small parts cylinder tests. Fourth, warning labels. When necessary, clear age grading and safety warnings must be visible on the product. And finally, documentation. Technical files must be maintained showing compliance with relevant safety standards. Something else authors need to comply with is the matter of contact details. According to the General Product Safety Regulation, it is clear that the regulation requires the inclusion of specific contact details on consumer products, including printed books. The GPSR mandates that products display the manufacturer's name, registered trade name or trademark, and postal and electronic addresses. For products imported into the EU, the GPSR requires the designation of a responsible person within the EU. Okay, I've mentioned this before, but I'll break it down now as it's so important. This responsible person is your go-between, serving as a contact point for authorities. The publisher's name and contact information should be included in the book. usually on the copyright page or back cover. If the publisher is based outside the EU, an EU-based responsible person must be designated. Their contact details should also be included in the book. Both the publisher's contact information and the EU responsible person's details are required for printed books sold within the EU to comply with the GPSR. The relevant provision for contact details is found in Article 8 of the regulation, which outlines the obligations of manufacturers and importers, including the requirement to display names and addresses. Also, Article 12 addresses the obligations of the EU responsible person, specifying when their contact details must appear on the product, its packaging, or accompanying documentation. The contact information must be placed on the product itself in the case of books. This is explicitly stated in Article 8 for manufacturers and Article 12 for the EU responsible person. Here is the text of Article 8 from the GPSR 2023-988, Article 8, Obligations of Manufacturers. 1. General Safety Requirement. Manufacturers shall ensure that products placed on the market are designed and manufactured in accordance with the general safety requirements set out in Article 5. 2. Technical documentation. Manufacturers shall draw up the technical documentation in accordance with Article 17 and carry out the applicable conformity assessment procedure in accordance with Article 16. 3. CE marking. Where compliance of a product with the applicable requirements has been demonstrated by that procedure, manufacturers shall affix the CE marking in accordance with Article 19. 4. Identification of products. Manufacturers shall ensure that their products bear a type, batch, serial number, or other element allowing their identification, or where the size or nature of the product does not allow it, that the required information is provided on the packaging or in a document accompanying the product. 5. Manufacturers' contact details. Manufacturers shall indicate their name, registered trade name, or registered trademark, and the postal address at which they can be contacted on the product, or, where that is not possible, on its packaging or in a document accompanying the product. The address shall indicate a single point at which the manufacturer can be contacted. 6. Instructions and safety information. Manufacturers shall ensure that the product is accompanied by instructions and safety information in a language easily understood by consumers and other end users as determined by the member state concerned. 7. Corrective measures. Manufacturers who consider or have reason to believe that a product which they have placed on the market is not in conformity with this regulation shall immediately take the necessary corrective measures to bring that product into conformity, to withdraw it, or to recall it as appropriate. 8. Notification obligations. Where the product presents a risk, manufacturers shall immediately inform the market surveillance authorities of the member states in which they made the product available to that effect, giving details in particular of the non-compliance and of any corrective measures taken. 9. Cooperation with authorities. Manufacturers shall, further to a reasoned request from a competent national authority, provide it with all the information and documentation necessary to demonstrate the conformity of the product with this regulation, in a language which can be easily understood by that authority. They shall cooperate with that authority at its request on any action taken to eliminate the risks posed by products which they have placed on the market. Article 12. Obligations of distributors. 1. When making a product available on the market, distributors shall act with due care in relation to the requirements applicable. 2. Before making a product available on the market, distributors shall verify that a. The product bears the required conformity marking. B. The product is accompanied by the required documents and by instructions and safety information in a language which can be easily understood by consumers as determined by the member state concerned. C. The manufacturer and the importer have complied with the requirements set out in Article 8, Paragraph 5 and 6 and Article 10, Paragraph 3, respectively. 3. Where a distributor considers or has reason to believe that a product is not in conformity with the applicable requirements set out in this regulation, the distributor shall not make the product available on the market until it has been brought into conformity. Furthermore, where the product presents a risk, the distributor shall inform the manufacturer or the importer to that effect, as well as the market surveillance authorities. 4. Distributors shall ensure that, while a product is under their responsibility, storage or transport conditions do not jeopardize its compliance with the requirements set out in this regulation. 5. Distributors who consider or have reason to believe that a product which they have made available on the market is not in conformity with this regulation shall make sure that the corrective measures necessary to bring that product into conformity, to withdraw it or recall it as appropriate, are taken. Furthermore, where the product presents a risk, distributors shall immediately inform the competent national authorities of the member states in which they made the product available on the market to that effect, giving details in particular of the non-compliance and of any corrective measures taken. 6. Distributors shall, further to a reasoned request from a competent national authority, provide it with all the information and documentation necessary to demonstrate the conformity of a product. They shall cooperate with that authority at its request on any action taken to eliminate the risks posed by products which they have made available on the market. And we have come to the end of the long quote. But here's some good news. The GPSR does not apply to products on the market before December 13th, 2024. Products already on the market before this date are not subject to the GPSR. This is covered in Article 46. And now to Article 19. It outlines obligations for online marketplaces to list product safety information, but don't worry. It applies only to risky products. We'll quote it now. 1. Where economic operators have sufficient reason to believe that a product that they've placed or made available on the market presents a risk, they shall immediately inform the market surveillance authorities of the member states in which they made the product available to that effect, giving details of the risk and of any corrective measures taken. 1. In case of a risk to the health and safety of consumers, economic operators shall immediately inform the consumers of the risk and warn them of the measures necessary to protect them from that risk. 2. Economic operators shall cooperate with market surveillance authorities at the latter's request on any action taken or to be taken to eliminate or mitigate the risks posed by products which they have placed or made available on the market. Where requested by a market surveillance authority, economic operators shall provide all information and documentation necessary to demonstrate the conformity of a product in a language which can be easily understood by that authority. So that's the end of the quote. If you don't think your books pose a risk, this part does not apply to you. To sum up, I urge you to read the legislation for yourself. It's not a lot of fun, to be honest, but right now, I'll give you the bottom line. I personally interpret these regulations to suggest that ebooks and audiobooks are not included. But don't take my word for it. Make your own decision. But for me, I will be proceeding as though they are not included. So for print books, the first thing you must do is make sure you have an EU responsible person. If you're using a print-on-demand company, it's likely they have one, which means you don't need to have another. If you're using BookVault, they have one. If you're using Lulu Direct, check with them. Otherwise, twist the arm or bribe a friend or relative in the EU. If you don't have one, or they don't wish to be the responsible person, EAS compliance provides a responsible person for €199 per year. The responsible person is the biggest issue for most. And as I said, if you are in the EU, you can simply appoint yourself as the responsible person. The other main obligation is that you'll have to include your details and the details of the responsible person, both snail mail and email addresses, on the copyright page or on the back cover. The other requirement is that each book requires an identifying mark, and an ISBN will do nicely for this. And remember, it all only applies to products placed on the market after December 13th, 2024. Nobody really knows for sure how strictly it will be enforced or even what's going on with it, so we'll just have to wait a while until everything gets ironed out.